The wind came rolling down from the mountains like a beast untamed, sweeping across the Montana plains and dragging dust and dry grass in its wake. Caleb Turner leaned forward in his saddle, squinting through the grit, the brim of his hat pulled low over his brow. His horse, a worn but loyal roan named Cooper, snorted and tossed his head, uneasy in the rising wind. It was late afternoon, that uneasy hour when the world seemed to hold its breath before dusk, and Caleb was alone with the sound of hooves and the steady rhythm of his thoughts, both equally heavy. He had been riding since dawn, following the faint, winding path from his ranch toward the old rail station that hadn't seen much use in months. His heart, though he'd never admit it aloud, was tethered to the past, to a promise written in ink that had long since faded. In his pocket, folded and refolded 100 times, was the letter. He didn't need to look at it anymore, he knew every word. Mr. Turner, I accept your proposal. I will arrive on the second train from St. Louis, bringing what little I own. I hope I may prove to be a good wife and companion in your new home. Yours faithfully, Eleanor Whitmore. He'd carried that letter like a prayer. When it first arrived, Caleb had read it over and over beneath the flicker of a kerosene lamp, each word lighting a spark in the lonely dark. He'd imagined her then, her voice, her smile, the way she might look standing on the porch at sunrise, a coffee cup in hand. He'd built that dream so carefully, plank by plank, the same way he'd built the house she never came to. That was 6 months ago. The train had come and gone, but Eleanor Whitmore had not stepped off. The agency sent one curt reply to his inquiry, "We are looking into the matter." After that, silence. Town gossip said she'd changed her mind, or perhaps found someone richer before the journey began. Some whispered darker things, that the trail west was no place for a woman traveling alone. Caleb didn't want to believe it, but nights were long, and his thoughts turned cruel in the quiet. Now he was a man on the edge of surrender. He had planned to sell what little he had, his cattle, his land, the ranch that was meant to be their home, and ride north where work was plentiful. But something, maybe faith or just plain stubbornness, had kept him from leaving. Even as the world turned harder, he waited. The sun dipped lower, bleeding gold into the clouds. Caleb reined Cooper to a stop at the crossroads where the trail split in two directions. One road led back toward Dry Creek in the small town where people still nodded to him out of pity. The other road stretched west into emptiness, a lonely scar across the prairie, leading to nowhere anyone cared to name. He sat there, motionless, the reins slack in his hands. The wind tugged at his coat, whispering like a ghost. That was when he saw it, a shadow, small and still, near the old wooden signpost where the trails met. At first, he thought it might be a trick of the light. But as he squinted through the swirling dust, the shape took form. A woman, sitting slumped beside the sign, her dress torn, bonnet hanging loose around her neck. Caleb's pulse quickened. He kicked his heels gently, guiding Cooper closer. "Miss," he called, his voice carried off by the wind. "You all right there?" No answer. He dismounted, boots sinking into the soft earth, and stepped closer. The woman's face lifted slightly at the sound of his approach. Her skin was pale, lips cracked from thirst. Beneath the dust, he saw something fragile but familiar, the faint resemblance to a photograph once printed in a newspaper ad for mail-order brides. "Caleb Turner," she whispered, her voice trembling and dry as paper. He froze. "Yes," he said slowly. Caleb pushed the horse harder than he ever had before, the reins cutting into his gloved hands, rain and dust stinging his face as Cooper galloped through the darkening plains. Eleanor's head rested against his chest, her breath shallow but steady. Every so often, she stirred, murmuring words he couldn't catch, names, prayers, fragments of some nightmares she'd lived through. He held her tighter, whispering softly, "You're safe now, ma'am. Just hold on." By the time they reached the cabin, the first stars had begun to pierce the sky. Caleb dismounted, cradling her in his arms as he pushed open the door. The hinges groaned, the room cold and dim except for the dull glow of embers in the fireplace. He laid her gently on the old cot by the hearth, threw wood on the fire, and struck a match. The flames came to life with a hiss, sending warmth crawling slowly back into the room, and into his chest. For a long while, he worked in silence. He filled a pot with water from the barrel, set it to boil, and found the last jar of broth from the pantry. When he turned, he saw her eyes half open, watching him. "You're safe here," he said again, kneeling beside her. "Name's Caleb Turner. You must be Eleanor." Her lips trembled as she nodded. "I am." Her voice was little more than a rasp, like wind through dry grass. He held a spoon to her lips, feeding her small sips of warm broth until color began to creep back into her cheeks. Only then did he notice the bruises, dark, ugly marks along her wrists, and the tear in her coat where a sleeve had been nearly ripped away. Fury, cold and sharp, ran through him. After a while, she tried to sit up. He steadied her with a gentle hand. "You shouldn't move yet," he said. "I have to tell you what happened," she whispered. "You need to know." Caleb nodded, settling beside her, his heart pounding in quiet dread. "I never meant to be late," she began, her eyes glistening in the firelight. "When I arrived in St. Louis, there was a man waiting at the station, a man who said he'd been sent by the agency to see me safely to you. I trusted him." She paused, swallowing hard. "But the train he took me to wasn't bound for Montana. We headed south. I knew something was wrong when he wouldn't let me step off at the first stop." Caleb's jaw clenched. He didn't interrupt. "There were others," she said, her voice shaking now. "3 of them. They said they helped women find better husbands, rich men who'd pay good money. But it was a lie. They took our papers, our money, everything. Some of the women they sold. Her breath caught. "I waited until they were drunk one night. Then I ran." The words hung in the air like smoke. Outside, the wind pressed against the walls, rattling the windows. Caleb felt his throat tighten. He'd heard of such gangs, men who hunted the lonely and desperate, who turned hope into a trap. But hearing it from her lips made it real in a way nothing else could. "How long have you been out there?" he asked quietly. 2 days, she said. "Maybe more. I lost track." He stared into the fire, fists clenched. Rage surged up in him, raw, helpless rage. But he forced it down. She didn't need fury, she needed calm. "You did right to run," he said finally. "They won't touch you again." Eleanor's eyes met his. For a moment, the fear in them softened. "I wasn't sure you'd still be here," she admitted. "After all this time," he smiled faintly, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepening. "I almost wasn't," he said. "But something told me to wait a little longer." Her lips parted, as if to speak, but exhaustion overcame her. She slumped back against the pillow, eyes fluttering closed. Caleb covered her with a blanket and sat back, watching the rise and fall of her chest. The fire crackled softly. Outside, coyotes howled somewhere beyond the ridge. Caleb leaned forward, feeding another log into the flames. His mind was a storm, half relief, half rage. The men who'd taken her were still out there, and if they were the kind to steal women off trains, they'd come looking once they realized she'd escaped. The storm arrived just after midnight, first a low moan through the canyons, then a crack of thunder that split the sky wide open. Rain came in sheets, hammering the roof of the cabin, the wind clawing at the shutters like a living thing. Caleb sat by the window, his rifle laid across his knees, eyes fixed on the horizon. The lightning illuminated the prairie in brief, blinding flashes, each one revealing nothing but rain and emptiness, then plunging it all back into black. Behind him, Eleanor stirred in her sleep, murmuring broken fragments of dreams. Sometimes she called a name, sometimes she just whimpered. Caleb turned once, watching her silhouette in the flickering light of the fire. She looked peaceful for a moment, then flinched, as if something reached for her even in sleep. He wanted to reach out, to tell her it was over, that she was safe. But he didn't believe it himself. He'd seen men like the ones she'd described, mercenaries of greed and cruelty, wandering the frontier in search of easy prey. If they had followed her trail, they would not stop until they found her. Caleb's mind replayed her words again and again. They said they helped women find better husbands. He clenched his jaw. "Better husbands," he muttered bitterly. "Better devils." Lightning struck close, the flash throwing the room into stark relief. The old clock on the wall ticked once, twice, then stopped. Caleb stood, peering through the rain-streaked glass. For a moment, all was empty. Then, movement. 3 shadows, distant but distinct, on horseback, their lanterns swinging faintly in the downpour. His breath caught. He rubbed at the glass with his sleeve, trying to see clearer. The figures were drawing closer, their pace slow and deliberate, the horses struggling through the mud. Caleb's stomach turned cold. He had expected this, hoped against it, but expected it all the same. He moved quietly, every motion practiced. The rifle was already loaded, he checked it anyway. He crossed the room to Eleanor, shaking her gently. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low but firm. "Wake up." Her eyes fluttered open. "Caleb, what is it?" "Riders," he said. 3 of them. Coming from the south trail. She sat up, clutching the blanket to her chest. They found me, she whispered, dread in her voice. Caleb crouched beside her, meeting her eyes. Listen to me, he said. They're not taking you again. Do you understand? For a long second, she stared at him, her lips trembling, but then she nodded. Something in her gaze changed, fear gave way to resolve. She rose unsteadily, her hands shaking as she reached for the lantern on the table. No light, Caleb said softly. They'll see it. He moved to the door, heart hammering in his chest. The rain had softened now, turning into a steady drizzle that carried every sound for miles. The hoofbeats were closer. He stepped out onto the porch, the wooden boards creaking under his boots. The wind smelled of wet earth and gunpowder waiting to happen. The riders halted about 50 yards out. One of them raised his lantern, shouting through the storm, "Evenin', friend. We're just looking for someone." Caleb called back, voice calm but iron-edged. "You're trespassing. Turn around." The man laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Ain't no need for threats, mister. We just lost a runaway is all. Belongs to us." Caleb's grip tightened on the rifle. "Ain't nobody belongs to you." The lightning flared again, just enough for him to see the glint of metal in the man's hand. The world exploded with thunder and gunfire. The first shot went wide, splintering the doorframe. Caleb fired back, dropping the man from his horse in one clean shot. Chaos followed, horses screaming, more shots, the acrid smell of powder filling the night. Caleb ducked behind a post, fired again, reloaded, moved. Years of ranch life and hunting had taught him patience, precision. The second man fell into the mud, his lantern shattered beside him. The third rider wheeled his horse and fired wildly toward the cabin. Bullets tore through the walls, sending sparks from the iron stove. Then, silence. The last man turned and fled into the darkness, his horse's hooves fading into the storm. Caleb stood there, chest heaving, rain streaming down his face. The wind howled across the open plain, carrying the smell of wet earth and gunpowder. He turned back toward the cabin, and froze. Eleanor was standing in the doorway, barefoot, her nightdress plastered to her skin, the rain shining in her hair like silver threads. She was holding one of his pistols, though her hands shook. Her eyes, those soft, frightened eyes he'd first seen at the crossroads, were fierce now, alive with something new. She stepped down from the porch, her voice barely a whisper but steady. "I told you I'd find my way." For a moment, Caleb couldn't speak. Then he nodded slowly, lowering his rifle. "You sure did," he said. They stood there, two survivors in the aftermath of storm and blood, as dawn began to bleed pale light across the horizon. The rain eased into a mist, and the wind carried the scent of wildflowers from the hills.